This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics in New York State. And on this episode, we're exploring Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman's bid to be the GOP gubernatorial nominee in 2026 and considering what his pathway to the executive mansion in Albany might look like. Our guest is Mike Dawidziak, a Republican strategist based out of Long Island, who, at least at this point, doesn't have any skin in the game. So we're going to pick his brain about the evolving GOP landscape. Welcome to the show, Mike, and thanks for making the time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So my relationship with Bruce Blakeman goes back to 2010 when he launched that unsuccessful bid to be the GOP Senate nominee, and people at the Capitol with an even longer institutional memory might remember his 30-point drubbing by State Comptroller Carl McCall in 1998. But for the most part, I think people outside of Long Island probably don't have a good sense of his background or his ideology. So what are the headlines that listeners should know about Bruce Blakeman and that he might want people to know as he launches a statewide campaign?
Well, I think the first thing he probably would want people to know, I mean, I can't speak for him, but I think the first talking point that you need to get out here, I think, is that this race is for an executive position. And he has executive experience, and he brings that to the table. And it's not just any old experience. It's not like he was a mayor of a little town.
Right.
You know, of the 3,144 counties there are in the United States, he's the county executive of the 29th largest county in the entire country. You know, that gives him executive experience over a very large government. So that is good experience in bringing to the table. It's experience that few people have ever had, really, that's run for governor, quite honestly.
Well, we have seen Republican candidates have county executive experience, maybe not to the size of this government. 2014, Rob Astorino from Westchester County, Mark Molinaro in 2018. Sure. I guess that one of the advantages, though, of being the county executive as opposed to a lawmaker is that maybe you haven't had to take some of the same votes and weighed in on some of the same issues the way Lee Zeldin might have when he was back in state Senate or Congress, or Elise Stefanik has had to do as a member of Congress. I mean, do you think that ultimately is something that could benefit Bruce Blakeman in terms of the record he can run on versus Stefanik?
Well, I hate to bust your bubble on that, but he actually had a long career as
Sure.
a legislator.
That's true.
He was not only on the county legislature for many, many years and was presiding officer, but he was also on the Hempstead Town Board. So he has had a pretty extensive legislative experience as well.
Well, I guess I think about the issues that you might vote on as a local legislator being different than the ones you might at the state level or nationally, where you might take more votes that you have to, hold your nose and do the way you might not have to as a local legislator.
Yeah, but I think the flip side of that is very few people ever get to know about it when you're a legislator. I always say you can go through your entire legislative career and people really don't know how you voted on anything, and you were probably never the deciding vote anyway. When you're an executive, everybody knows what you're doing, and a lot of people don't like it. So the longer you're an executive, the more you actually do things that people don't like. So, I always tell my clients that never run for an executive position unless it's the last job you want in politics, because chances are it's going to be. And the only one that's really worth the dare is governor, because then you might become president out of it.
Well, obviously, the timing of Blakeman's run was complicated by the fact that he was up for re-election in November, so he couldn't run for one office while openly campaigning for another office and expect to win that first office. But are you surprised that he still got into the race after Congresswoman Elise Stefanik had already tried to plant her flag as the GOP nominee? Because I think there was a large consensus that she had done a good job of clearing the field, so to speak, especially getting Mike Lawler not to run earlier this year.
Bruce is a different animal. Bruce has always seen his opportunities and seized them. No matter how daunting those odds may have been, he threw his hat in for New York City mayor once. Obviously he threw his hat in for the U.S. Senate. He's always sort of seen the opportunities and seized them. And look, when he put his hat in for a county executive, nobody thought he was going to win that race. In 2021, people did not expect him. They just thought, oh, there's Bruce again throwing his hat in, for another race, and lo and behold, he wins.
Well, what do you see then as his pathway as a general election candidate? We can get into the primary in a second, but big picture, what is the argument for him potentially winning in a deep blue state in a year where traditionally this type of midterm Republicans in the White House benefits the Democrats running for election?
Well, the argument for anybody running for public office is, here's why it's good for you to vote for me. That's what anybody running has to convince the voters of. A long time ago, one of my first mentors in politics told me there's really only one issue people vote on. It's called quality of life. And it's their quality of life, not their neighbor's quality of life, not necessarily their whole community, but theirs individually. So everybody, Hochul including, has to convince everybody why it's good for you to vote for me. Now, in Bruce's case, he's got a good argument because the Albany government for quite a while now has been very, very New York City centric. It has been dominated by people who come from New York City. They have the majority in both houses. And what does that mean? Well, that means like a region like Long Island gets the short end of the stick when it comes to things like infrastructure dollars and things like that. And Long Island, for example, as a region, sends more money to Albany than it gets back than any other region in the state. And that's an argument which is also going to carry in a lot of the upstate areas, So there's a very cohesive argument to be made here. And a Republican can start off knowing they're not going to win New York City anyway. So concentrate on Long Island and upstate New York.
But those arguments aren't necessarily new to Republicans who are looking to win statewide. So is there something about the atmosphere in 2026 or Blakeman's identity or the messaging that he might lean into that you think makes this picture different than, say, 2022, which was a great year for Republicans, but still, 6 or 7 points short of a statewide victory?
Well, if nobody's noticed, and I wouldn't be surprised if nobody's noticed, Long Island has continued to be an outlier for now 5 years straight. When large parts of the country are going blue, Long Island goes red.
Right.
And that's significant because of this. Republicans are only about a third of the registered voters in both Nassau and Suffolk counties. But for 5 years, Long Island has been going dominantly red. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is a backlash against what they view as far too progressive, far left policies coming out of Albany from New York City Democrats. It's things like cashless bail. It's things like congestion pricing. It's things like the MTA tax. It's all these things combined and then going after things like home rule for local zoning. These things don't play well with Long Islanders. So even though Long Island is deeply purple, I mean, basically the registration numbers are about a third Democrat, a third Independent, a third Republican. Even though this is a very, very purple area, it has been voting red 5 years in a row. Now, if that can go viral, if you can take those arguments which have worked and take them upstate and make them work, yeah, that's a very potent message.
Well, given the geographical advantage that Bruce Blakeman has coming from Long Island, given his profile, given what we've seen from his initial campaign messaging with his, say, launch video, he seems to have the background and the makeup of a stronger Republican candidate in a blue state like New York than someone like Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who since 2014, joining Congress, has drifted more to the right and not necessarily looked to make any sort of pivot in the first months of her campaign. So do you think Bruce Blakeman will lean into that strategic messaging with primary voters? And if he does, will Republican voters be strategic with their primary votes? Because that didn't really work 4 years ago when Harry Wilson was making that same argument and came up like fourth in the Republican primary for governor.
I don't think that voters vote strategically. We consultants have a saying that when you're going after votes, if your target is the head, you get the wrong target. You always go for the heart. That's how you get voters. Voters vote with their heart, with their feelings. If you touch something with them that you think, okay, this person's going to fight for me, this person's going to go in and fight on the issues that I care about. I want safe neighborhoods. I want somebody who's going to go up there and stand up to these city Democrats about cashless bail and things like that. So if you can make that case and make those touchstones with the voters, that's why they'll vote for you. But no, I don't think voters are ever strategic with their votes.
Do you think that's unique to Republican voters, or do you think that applies to Democratic voters as well? Because I think about, say, incumbent Governor Kathy Hochul, who's going to have most likely a primary, and no one is super excited about Kathy Hochul in the Democratic Party, but I would say she is far and away the favorite to be the Democratic nominee in 2025, and I wonder how much of that is, say, strategic positioning by groups like organized labor and some activists.
Listen, Democrats have always been better in New York State about circling the wagons than Republicans have. And then you just pointed out that's by virtue of you have a lot of special interests,
sure,
and people who do not want people don't want to have to choose. I mean, imagine you are a major developer, the major donor, the unions, and now you've got to figure out which horse to back. That's not something people like to be faced with. So the Democrats have just been very much better at circling the wagons and saying, even if somebody insist on primarying like Tom Suozzi did for governor back against Spitzer. And then even in that situation, they're much better at shutting down the money and shutting down all the voting apparatuses and whatever else. And another thing is that Republicans, being in the minority party in New York, have to rely on things like grassroots politics and retail politics. They're not just going to buy an election and win it. And this is where particularly the Nassau and Suffolk Republican machines excel. These two of the largest Republican committees in the country, and they excel at the ground game. They excel on retail politics, door to door, on the phones, texting, touching people individually. This is where these two party committees really excel.
Is that a disadvantage at all when it comes to the party and its relationships internally? Are Nassau and Suffolk isolated at all by other county leaders who maybe out of jealousy or because of distance are like, I don't like those guys. They do their own thing. They think they're so great. And if that is an attitude, does that create a problem, say, at a convention where Bruce Blakeman's going to be looking for automatic ballot access?
Let's start with this, that in order to get automatic ballot access, you only need to get 25%. Nassau and Suffolk alone gives him most of that.
Right.
So it's almost inconceivable that I think that is, assuming this goes to a convention, I think it's inconceivable that neither one of them gets 25% at the convention. Mm-hmm. But the answer to your first question, party leaders, be they Republican or Democrat, care about winning. That's number one. I mean, in the end, they're going to back the candidate they think has the best chance of winning. Now, so far, Stefanik has had the playing field all to herself. Blakeman couldn't ask for support until he was a declared candidate. You can't ask somebody to support you unless you're a declared candidate. So you can't ask somebody to take a dare, and then you don't even declare. So so she's had the playing field all to herself. And I'm sure she has been all around upstate New York, meeting with county leaders and lining up support. And that's what she should do. But I've been involved in a few of these races over the years, and I can tell you that I've seen that support shift, switch, and even as late as on the convention floor, where a county leader had said he was going to back this person and then votes for somebody else on the county floor. So I've actually been on the floor of the New York State Convention where that's happened. So they're going to make up their minds based upon who they think has the best chance of winning.
How much cursing was there on the floor when there was that last-second switcheroo?
Honestly, no. It's politics. Honestly, unless you are, a neophyte to this process, this happens. So there really wasn't much at all. Quite honestly, there was disappointment and, and hand-wringing and whatever else. But, this is politics. People, make deals and they cut them at the last minute. And, that's the way it works. And, if you've been around it any amount of time, that's the way it works.
For the holiday season, Dispatches from Planet Albany is offering a special gift when you support the show. A $50 contribution or recurring commitment of $5 a month gets you a 12x9 poster celebrating life in Planet Albany. More information, including a link to donate, can be found wherever you listen to this podcast. Support for Dispatches from Planet Albany provided by National Fuel. Natural gas delivers affordable, reliable energy to millions of New Yorkers every day. Trusted utilities are committed to keeping homes warm, businesses running, and communities thriving. Natural gas is a critical part of an all-of-the-above energy strategy, one that prioritizes sustainability for the Empire State's future. Learn more at betterplannobans.com. Well, that idea of thin skin versus thick skin makes me think of the Stefanik campaign's reaction in response to Bruce Blakeman jumping in, which is basically to go from zero to nuclear in about a second. And I'm curious whether you think that is advised or whether there's an argument to be made that they should be, more calm, cool, and collected, or whether none of that really matters down the road.
I think choice C. I don't think any of it really matters down the road. Look, there's when I first started in politics, and we're going back to the 1970s, the Republicans actually had the majority in the assembly at that point. Perry Dorier was the Republican majority leader in the assembly. You didn't go negative at all ever unless it was at the last minute and you were way behind. And the argument was you look desperate if you went negative, and then along the years, this argument of it's a fight for definition. You have to define your opponent before they get a chance to define themselves, and that sort of has crept in now as the dominant thinking. So now you go negative right away, right from the start. I don't think that matters to the voters. What the voters want to hear is, again, why should I vote for you? Why is voting for you going to be good for me? Convince me of that. And I think they discount most of the negative stuff. I think they're so used to hearing it that I think they discount most of it.
Do you see any parallels between a Stefanik Blakeman race and the one we saw 4 years ago at the top of the GOP primary with Lee Zeldin and Andrew Giuliani, who had a much higher national profile than Lee Zeldin, but obviously lacked some of the connections that Lee Zeldin had on Long Island and potentially around the state?
Well, I see the parallels of, again, people starting off where, well, who's Lee Zeldin? If you don't come from Long Island, you don't know who Lee Zeldin is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things, I've been doing campaign work for well over 40 years. And one of the things I've always said is, one of the things I never worry about is low name recognition. Now I'm talking for an executive race. I'm not talking about for a legislative race or judicial race or something like that. But an executive race, if you start off with low name recognition, don't worry about it. By the time election day comes around, everybody's going to know who the two candidates are. I always point out that in 1991, the next president of the United States was a virtual unknown. And if you did know who Bill Clinton was, it wasn't for a good reason.
Right.
You remembered the disastrous speech he gave at the San Francisco convention. But the next president of the United States was a governor of a small southern state that virtually nobody could have named. And, by the time, of course, Election Day came by, everybody knew who Bill Clinton was. And that's true, I think, of most, if not all, executive races. By the time Election Day comes around, everybody's going to know who the two candidates are.
Well, part of the way Lee Stefanik and Bruce Blakeman are going to get that name recognition is through the media. And generally, in recent years, Stefanik has been loath to mix it up with local news outlets, preferring appearances with either national outlets or right-wing organizations. Do you think Blakeman will follow the same playbook, or do you envision he's going to make himself available to the Buffalo Newses, the Albany Times Unions, Newsday in his backyard, and TV stations around the state?
Well, past performance is usually the best indicator of future behavior. He has never been afraid to mix it up. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing because he's certainly not Newsday's favorite person. Newsday, hits him regularly on the editorial pages. Not that many people read editorials. Mostly us insiders do. But that hasn't necessarily. You might say that hasn't actually helped him with his relationships with the press, but he has certainly never been afraid to mix it up with them. So if he runs true to his past behavior, I think he's going to be mixing it up with all the local press.
And what about on the paid media side of things? Where does he get money from to reach out to voters? Is this guy been prolific in his fundraising in the past? Does he have connections with, say, D.C. interests? Where does he get money? And is he going to have a tough time getting money since Stefanik got in the race, say, a month earlier?
Well, true, but she's going to have a tough time raising money now, too. When she was the only candidate in the race, and if she was going to be the only candidate in the race, then there are a lot of Washington institutions, the RGA, the Republican Governors Association. There's a lot of players who get to play. But if there's a primary, a lot of these groups and players are prohibited from getting involved until there's a bona fide candidate. Her means to raise money has now gotten limited as well. Also, he's got a better position to raise money from. Executives are the best fundraisers in politics.
Sure.
Presidents, governors, mayors, county executives, town supervisors. These are the best fundraisers in the world because, let's face it, they dole out most of the patronage and most of the jobs. So, he's got a much better position, shall we say, to raise money from, and probably a much better area. Nassau is a very rich county. It's a very wealthy county with a lot of big dollar Republican donors that live there. I suspect he will catch up very quickly in the fundraising race and probably pass her.
And there probably is a calculation amongst donors on the island that, well, even if he doesn't win the primary or win the general, he's still going to be county executive for the next 3 years. So we'd like to be on his good side regardless. But I want to come back to that argument you made about the appeal to the heart of the voters. So what does that mean in a Republican primary in 2026? Is it who's ever the most ideologically pure? Is it whoever is the most closely aligned with President Donald Trump and is like the most MAGA candidate? What does it mean to appeal to the primary voters in the Republican Party in 2026?
Well, you got to make an argument that you can deliver on the issues that voters care about. Now, I'm sure that this is going to differ from region to region to region in the state. But, for example, on Long Island, the roads are in horrible shape. People are always complaining about the conditions of the roads. We get the short end of the stick when it comes to infrastructure dollars. So it's something which, if an argument like that can be made, this is why you should vote for me, because I know what you care about, and I'm going to go fight for that. That's how you get to their heart. That's how and that they believe you're sincere, that you're really going to do it.
So you think it's about specific issues and not like a vibes race, so to speak?
Oh no! You have to translate. I mean, it's both. I mean, you're still going for the heart, but you got to translate that through issues. You got to put meat on the skeleton. You got to say, okay, I'm going to, this area, I'm running in Utica right now, and unemployment is high. So here's my plan for economic development in this area to bring more jobs and more economic development here. I mean, it's going to vary from region to region what people care about and how you can get to their heart.
Politico has noted that Blakeman, unlike Stefanik, identifies, I believe, as pro-choice. What does that mean for a Republican primary? Because in some parts of the country, that would be an automatic death knell.
It hasn't been for Republicans in Long Island in the past. We have had Republicans who have voted Rick Lazio. Rick Lazio was the pro-choice, and
not the 2010 Republican nominee for governor.
And well, no, but he was the 2000 for Senate.
Sure.
And he always, and even in the 2010 race, had no problem getting the backing of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party were vociferous in their support of Rick Lazio, even though he was pro-choice. So being pro-choice as a Republican in New York thus far has never hurt anybody.
Well, is this all a moot point? Is this all a strategic exercise that's a lot of fun for us to have if and when President Donald Trump decides to get off the sidelines and puts his finger on the scale? Do you think that is enough to get someone out of the race completely as opposed to just swinging primary voters?
I think it depends upon how early he does it. I mean, I think if he does it early, yeah, sure. Then I think then this is an exercise of futility. But if he waits until both of these candidates have really spoken to and touched a lot of the voters, and a lot of the voters are committed and whatever else, then it might not make a difference. Again, it really matters how soon he does it.
This go around, unlike past elections, we're going to actually have formal tickets that people are basically going to run on in the primaries. And I'm curious whether you think there is a type of candidate based on geography or ideology that makes sense as an LG with Bruce Blakeman's gubernatorial bid, or do lieutenant governors not matter and it's just about do no harm, so basically find somebody who's not going to mess things up for you?
Well, I'm a veteran of 4 presidential campaigns, and when it came to picking a vice president, I always said you go for real estate. I always say, you always go for electoral votes. And so often that hasn't been the case. The classic case was Al Gore in 2000. I was actually on Fox and Friends right after Gore had gotten the nomination. And I'm sitting on the couch, and they're asking me questions, and they out of the blue they asked me who he should pick as his running mate. And the funny thing was I was looking at a tape of this a few years ago, and I forgot entirely what I had said. And I was like watching this tape going, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what I said, And I hear myself say he should pick Senator Graham from Florida.
Yeah.
Florida, Hanging Chads, Florida. I mean, again, his Lieberman was a historic pick, but it didn't get him any electoral votes. He was always going to win Connecticut. He was always going to have Connecticut's electoral votes. So it was, to my mind, it was a wasted pick. So long-winded answer getting back to New York, it doesn't matter as much because we don't elect a governor electorally.
Sure.
It's not as critical as it would be in picking a vice president. But sure, you want to balance the ticket. You always want to try to balance the ticket with somebody who represents a constituency or an area that you don't. So this might be somebody, you want to look for somebody from Western New York, possibly the northern regions. But this is probably, it's a good chance to balance the ticket and hopefully get you some support.
Do you think the focus should be getting a bump for that primary, or should he be thinking further down the road in terms of a general election and potentially getting a bump from an LG?
I mean, if it were me, I would be looking more for the general. I mean, I think that I think in this case, people are going to vote for either Bruce Blakeman or Lee Stefanik. I don't think they're going to. I don't think they're going to make a decision based upon who the potential LG is. So I would be thinking more down the road on this if it were me.
Well, finally, if you had to handicap this race right now, would you put Blakeman as the favorite in the primary?
No, you got to let the race be run. I think he has a lot of advantages.
But you don't think he's the favorite, so that means you would suggest Stefanik's the favorite at this point?
No. I think this
so
is
toss up.
No. I think this is and anybody could win it, but I think Blakeman has a lot of advantages here that, if pressed, and assuming Trump does not get get involved on the opposite side. If I were a betting man, which I am not, and I always say it's also a fool's errand to predict too far out, but let's face it, we like this sort of stuff. I always say political junkies are like guys at the racetrack with their Hawaiian shirts and their binoculars, and we love making predictions. I look at Bruce's advantages, and I think I would predict him the winner.
Well, I appreciate you taking a stand. What about for the general? I mean, do you still think it's an uphill climb?
That's a long shot for any Republican.
Sure.
We're not just talking about Bruce Blakeman here. Look, the enrollment edge is 2-1.
Yep.
Democrat, Republican. That should be daunting for any Republican making this run. But I always say, look, Republicans don't really have any business winning in New York City or New York State. But when things get bad enough, shall we say when Democrats screw up bad enough, it opens the door for Republican to winning. It did in '93 for Giuliani. It did in '94 for Pataki. If people aren't happy, and right now there are a lot of people who are not happy, especially regionally in this part of the state, on Long Island certainly, upstate New York certainly, Western New York. If the Republicans can obviously raise the money, because this is going to be a huge dollar race. I don't even want to think about what this race is going to cost because I'm not involved. But the
not yet. But you're taking calls. I hope.
I think I'm aged out. I think my years are my big race years are behind me. I think, but I certainly would never do another presidential. By the way, but yeah, I could see this race getting very competitive. And look, everybody's looking at how closely Zeldin got. And look, if Zeldin had pivoted toward the middle earlier on in that race, he might have won.
Yeah, he had a good ad at the end about the pro-choice women saying, I have this issue, but other things are much more important for me, and that's why I support Zeldin. And it was like, this is way too little, way too late, man. That's right.
I mean, he finally got religion, but it was too late. It was too late in the game at that point. I mean, when the old political conventional wisdom is, if you're in a Democratic primary, you run to the left. If you're a Republican primary, you run to the right. And then if you win those primaries, you move to the middle. He waited way too long to move to the middle.
Yeah.
And in the end, independent voters, blanks, non-affiliates, whatever you want to call them, they usually make the decision. They're the voters that swing the election one way or another. Now for a Republican running in New York, you need a lot of them. You need a big percentage of them. I mean, you can't just win them by 51% and win. But they're there. They're there to be won over.
Well, we've been speaking with Michael Dawidziak. He is a Republican strategist who is just the right age for dispatches from Planet Albany. Mike, thank you so much for making the time and sharing your insights. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
In a way, I hate to see them running against each other. I hope they're not going to be damaging each other. But Elisa's fantastic and Bruce's, they're two fantastic people. And I always hate it when two very good friends of mine are running, and I hope there's not a lot of damage done.